All right, everyone. Aloha and welcome back to the AM Sports Podcast. This episode, it's going to be NFL draft centric. We're going to talk about the recent NFL draft that happened. I also talk about the Houston Texans because they've made some big moves in the draft and, of course, in NFL free agency. Joining me on the AM Sports podcast today is, let me look at the notes because you got a pretty extensive resume here. So it's like, man, it's time to memorize. Known for her work with Bleacher Report and as a featured analyst for Pro Football Spot, Miss Vanessa de Beaumont. Vanessa, how's it going?
Hi, it's great. It's been doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for joining the show. I've been reaching out to a couple of different writers, and I came across some of your articles, and man, you know your stuff when it comes to football. And
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I feel like I gotta ask you to come on the show before your stock explodes too high. I bet. I feel like any day some of the big networks might recognize.
Nah. I mean, I don't want to say no, but it's still a dream.
All right, so before we talk football, let's talk a bit about your background. You were born in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to school in Boston, but you're Houston based. Somehow, like, how does it all come together? Because that just seems like so random. And
yeah, so I think it's been a really interesting mix to have all together. I am French Canadian. French was my first language. Moved to Texas at a young age.
Okay.
Became super immersed in the Texas lifestyle, culture, but then decided I wanted to switch it up, come back up north, went to school at Boston University, and have been studying journalism and advertising here, which has been a really fantastic experience as well.
Yeah.
And still haven't really subscribed to the Boston sports, to be honest. But it is a big part of it here. So it's a sports town, whether I subscribe to their favorite teams or not. It's a good environment to be in.
Awesome. You can also, speaking of subscribing, you can also subscribe to your favorite podcast/vodcast, AM Sports Guys. So.
Nice segue.
Yeah, it's a good segue. All right, so, and also I just want to let everyone know, for people watching this episode, it's not going to be simulcast in French. It's just going to be strictly English. So, all right, so, yeah, boomskis. All right, so I'm a huge NFL fan. I love the NFL. I'm a big time, and watching the draft it's a holiday for me. My friends and I, when we're all together, I'm in the military, so unfortunately, a lot of my close friends and I are all geographically separated. However, when we are together, it's always a big party. And you mentioned that you're a Texans fan.
Oh yes.
Yeah. What's your draft grade? How excited are you about their picks?
I was a little bit caught off guard in all the right ways. I've often criticized General Manager Rick Smith for sort of playing it conservative. At one point, I even told some of my friends I wouldn't be surprised if Smith trades out of the 22 pick and he ironically moves up one. And so
in your face.
Right, exactly. And I shouldn't have been that caught off guard because, as you're probably obviously aware, the Texans have been making some pretty huge moves this summer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I shouldn't have been that surprised that he went so hard with, very athletic, high ceiling, but sort of raw still guys early on. Obviously, Will Fuller, fastest wide receiver in the draft.
Yeah.
And then I really loved the selection of Nick Martin to bolster that center position. You got the franchise that you're hoping in Osweiler, so you gotta make sure that you build that repertoire with the center right away. And I, for some reason, love the selection of Braxton Miller. I thought it was fantastic. It seemed so unnecessary with the drafting of Fuller in the first round.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it gives them this sort of elusive X factor. The Texans a lot last season tried to, because of their sort of carousel of quarterbacks, try to use a wildcat in some of these trick plays more often. They even got Arian Foster in the mix, Jonathan Grimes, BJ Daniels. Bryson Miller is actually a legitimate threat at that wildcat. He's not, somebody that you're trying to turn into that. He could actually be a really viable option, as well as just sort of like a big play guy. So those first three rounds were like really, really exciting for me. And then a little bit caught me off guard that they sort of abandoned, so to speak, the defense, which is like so much what they hang their hat on. But
Yeah.
I really thought that it was like aggressive. It could backfire, but it was aggressive, and I appreciated that from a guy who's typically so conservative.
So I want to talk about Braxton Miller for a second. So as I mentioned pre-show, I'm in the military, and for the previous 4 years, I lived in Dayton, Ohio. Braxton
Oh
Miller
wow.
is Braxton Miller's from that area, and actually lived in
Mm-hmm.
the township that he's from. And as you can imagine, Ohio is just huge Buckeye country as a state. Everyone's a big Buckeyes fan, and I lived in Ohio the exact 4 years that Braxton Miller was at Ohio
Oh my
State.
gosh.
Yeah, so I mean, and being in that area where he's from, of course, he's a local icon. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
let's like the guy's a stud. So
Oh
and he
yeah.
can and obviously he was a Heisman contender at one point for quarterback,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of Martin kind of used him in a different fashion this way. Yeah, but I want to talk more about what he really had to do for that offense, because they really didn't. I don't think they needed him, but it's nice to
Right.
have. Yeah.
Exactly. I think you nailed it right on the head there. As you said, they needed that the other threat, the vertical threat, and they got it in the first round with Will Fuller. And I still
Yeah.
believe that Jalen Strong is an option for them that needs some work. But the guy's a physical freak. I mean, he's
Yeah.
just absolutely super over the top talented, just physicality. So they had those boxes checked, as you said. It was Braxton Miller was sort of like, I was hoping for it, but as you said, it wasn't a real need. They still had problems with the safety position, which they sort of addressed later, but not really early on. So I thought it was, as you said, more of a luxury pick, but at the same time, you're entering a season with Osweiler, who you think what you have, but I remember reading Bill O'Brien talking about, like, I didn't even talk to the guy really before we signed him. So you think but you don't really know what you're getting, and it's entering a new system. And so you sort of have this capability with Braxton Miller. In my mind, the first thing that I thought of was, this is a guy who can help you make that play to come back in a game.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've always noticed about my favorite team, the Houston Texans, I've always criticized, is that if they don't get a lead, and if they don't have a lead going into the fourth quarter, I'm just automatically sort of like, oh, I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. And they were never built, especially on that successful sort of Arian Foster run offense. They weren't built to come back. Steady churning, Andre Johnson for 10 yards, Owen Daniels for 10 yards, Arian Foster sort of slowly but steadily. They were never predicated on these big downfield plays. Now you all of a sudden have this electrifying guy who you don't know what's going to happen. Do they throw him a screen behind the line of scrimmage and then he throws a bomb to DeAndre Hopkins?
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen. And there's this element of elusiveness. And I think he could be a real, true, just confused. It's not the sort of Tim Tebow Wildcat where you really kind of know. Like, I mean, this is a guy that can line up as a receiver, and all of a sudden you have to sort of respect the fact that he might actually catch a 50-yard pass, or he might be the one throwing one.
Yeah.
So definitely not a position of need, because the tight end position has definitely a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you don't, I sort of liken it to, I know this is sort of maybe an unfair comparison, but I'm living in Boston, so this is a comparison I thought of. The New England Patriots don't have a real running threat, but do they need one? The Texans, I think, are sort of taking that approach in sort of letting the tight end position be and saying, we have stocked up on running backs now. I think they have more than really honestly they need. And they have stocked up on the wide receiver position. So they're sort of investing in that and saying, we're not going to take that approach to our offense, and we're going to choose to go fast and dynamic as opposed to sturdy and stout, is sort of what I think they're trying to say here.
Speaking of fast and dynamic, and I feel like that's a perfect description of Will Fuller. How just what do you think about him pairing with DeAndre Hopkins? Because if you think about it, I mean, DeAndre Hopkins had an amazing year last year.
Oh, yeah.
And teams are specifically game planning against him with Brian Hoyer at quarterback and whoever else Houston threw behind center. But what kind of impact can Will Fuller have on the offense, and also for helping out DeAndre Hopkins?
Oh, obviously the guy has issues as far as his hands. That was a thing that was going to. But the undeniable fact is he is like just a burner completely, just super super fast. So obviously you know someone who's stretch the field, and it's sort of like I liken it to somebody who makes, you know, somebody like J.R. Smith, you know, like makes crazy 3-point shots. He's not always going to make them. He's going to chuck them all the time. But you have to respect it because there's going to be that time that he's going to make it. And so I think that Will Fuller is going to have that effect where it's sort of going to be, you know, it's not going to be a pass he's going to catch that you can live with is I guess what I'm trying to say. It won't be sort of the thing where we'll let him be because we can live with it if he catches the 50-yard pass because, you know, next thing you know, you're down 7. So I think he's instantly going to stretch the field. Hopkins is probably still going to be getting a ton of attention until I would say the Houston Texans bye, which is just after midseason. And at that point, I think if Will Fuller has made enough of an impact, you'll start to see some of the attention move away. But I don't expect any real attention to be shifted away from Hopkins until that point. I think that teams will still be testing the young guys, meaning even Jalen Strong I include in that because he is still just going to be a sophomore in his sophomore season. So I think that the Texans will still have to be cognizant of the fact that attention will be on Nuke Hopkins for the beginning of the season until one of those guys really sets up, whether it's Lamar Miller really starting to make an impact catching passes out of the backfield, whether it's Will Fuller really making those crazy Deshaun Jackson sort of Ted Ginn Jr. Touchdown plays. Right. Or, you know, Jalen Strong really making those really high point contested catches. Even, you know, Cecil Shorts will still be in the mix. Bryson Miller will, of course, obviously be in there as well. So I think that the Texans right now have options. They have a lot of weapons, and that's something that they had, if you can recall, in those seasons where they went 12-4. They had a ton of options. And I think that that's great that the arsenal will be so diverse. So I don't necessarily think that Will Fuller himself would take DeAndre Hopkins will free him up. I think the variety will be more of what gives him some breathing room. Sorry.
Everyone, you're watching AM Sports with Alex and Martin. We're talking Vanessa de Beaumont, who can also speak French. I feel like I got to throw that out there. Just got everyone up to speed. We've been talking NFL draft and Houston Texans, specifically talking about the Houston Texans draft picks with Will Fuller, Nick Martin in the second round, and Brandon Miller. And Vanessa, I don't know if you noticed, but that handsome man, he's on the lower left of my
Hello.
screen. So this is Vanessa. This is Alex. He's a Buccaneers fan.
Oh! I have to ask.
No.
I have to ask the second round, the kicker. What are your thoughts?
I'm sorry?
The kicker in the second round. What are your thoughts?
I can't remember who said it, but I have to agree that you don't get a chance every single year to be able to sign the best place kicker in college football. So I think that when you look at what happened with their season last year, you have a couple incidents where it's coming down to the end, and you need that really strong kicking presence. Special teams obviously is a third of the game. They had a strong kicker in Connor Barth. They had let him go. They signed him season in the middle of the season because they had some bad issues with place kicking. They brought him back, and then now he's gone again. Because you get somebody who is solid, who has a very, very strong leg and is consistent, especially now that the PATs are from a lot further back, not just a chip shot anymore. So you really do need that consistency and from distance. So I think that was a good job by them. Obviously, having Jameis on the offense helps out. They shored up their secondary with Vernon Hargreaves the third, and so you pump up the special teams as well. It's a full court press, if you will, to make sure they're shoring up all parts of their game. So I think it was actually a good move. Sometimes you think it's a little crazy to trade up for a kicker like that, but in this case, definitely worth it.
Hey, Vanessa, staying on the draft, the Houston Texans, they drafted notable names, common known players in the first three rounds. Will Fuller, having a hard time saying his last name today. Nick Martin and Braxton Miller. Of the remaining Texans picks in rounds 4 through 7, who from those players and those picks has the best chance to make an impact for the team?
Excuse me, just 1 second.
If anybody,
Right. Okay, let me just give 1 second. I'm actually a bad Texans fan right now, and I'm trying to remember some of these people's names. I know that the remaining picks went to the running back position, the safety position, the defensive tackle position. Here, let me just pull this up so I can give them the respect of saying their names, because
I didn't mean to catch you off guard there. So
no, not a problem. Not a problem. I actually did spend some time looking over them. I was also spending some time looking at my finals. All right. Well, that's not.
By the way, Alex is not a Buccaneers fan. He's a Patriots fan, I believe. I said, is that correct, Alex?
What? You
Shenanigans, right?
Oh, you.
All right, let me get through this. All right. Okay, so now that I can Tyler Ervin. All right, the running back. I watched actually a few of his highlight reels this afternoon, actually. So didn't remember his name, unfortunately, but maybe we will, because out of all of them, I think that he has the potential to come in and make the most impact. You know who your starting running back is. It's Lamar Miller. And Alfred Blue is a good change of pace because he's a bigger guy, and he was used more as like a sort of pass catcher in short yardage situations. He's not the speed guy. Actually, I think he's kind of a little bit slow.
Yeah.
But Lamar is that speed guy. What you get in Tyler Ervin, I think, is sort of a poor man's Darren Sproles. Smaller guy, really dodgy, agile. And I was watching him play, and he sort of reminds me of like an Akeem Hunt as well. I really like Jonathan Grimes that the Houston Texans have, who's right now at the third position. I actually think that his playing style is actually a little bit reminiscent of Arian Foster's. Similar size, build, good vision, enough power, pretty good at pass blocking. I think he's actually far and away better pass blocker than Alfred Blue. But I think that if the Houston Texans like what they see in Tyler Ervin as a return man, as a return specialist, I think that he could potentially succeed in that position. As could Braxton Miller, I believe, if they wanted to. Will Fuller has that burner speed if they wanted to put him there. So I think that finally they're going to have a lot of really quality options for that as well. I know I'm sort of getting off topic, but the Texans have had a really poor return specialist for since Jacoby Jones, honestly. So I think that he could actually make an impact as a late round guy, as a return specialist if he made the team that way. KJ Dillon, the safety. The Texans aren't super deep at safety, and it's not actually one of the best positions, even though Andre Howe, actually, since they shifted him over from the corner position, has thrived a lot at that position. Yeah. I actually really loved Quinn Demps in his original run with the Texans before he moved on. I was really glad that we brought him back last season.
He's solid.
Oh, yeah. I'm a big Demps fan, so I think those are pretty much your solid starters. So I think Dillon won't have as much of an opportunity to make an impact outside of, say, special teams. And then as far as the defensive tackle, DJ Reader, he's obviously been recruited to be the heir apparent to Vince Wilfork. However, if you remember, Christian Covington out of Rice last season was drafted by the Texans in the late round as well. And I actually really enjoyed seeing him play. Obviously, he took over more in the situations where the Texans had sort of locked things up, as more along lines of garbage time, if you will. But I thought that he had really high motor. He seemed to gel really well with the defensive line, and local product. It sort of flows, all the whole story. He's not as big as Reader. Reader's very, very impressive, size-filling guy. But I think that Covington, to me, seems to have that slot shored up at the moment. But I think that it's good that they've sort of explored that option with Reader as well. So in response to your question, the one that I think has the most opportunity for impact is the running back, Irvin.
I like that. It's a good answer.
All right. So now that you covered all of that, where do you go from there? Obviously, it's we still have plenty of off season left to go. So free agency is going to be obviously the next step. They have to sign their draftees, but then also they have to continue with free agency. What's the next step for the Texans before next season, before OTAs?
I think as far as signing free agents, they could definitely look more into defensive backs. I think it's never been the team's strength. They've always really shored up the defensive line. The front seven has always been their focus, and they've relied on the pass rush to make things happen for the defensive backs to sort of make their lives easier. Jonathan Joseph actually really surprised me last season because I was sort of expecting things to sort of go down, and then they re-signed him, and I was like, "Ooh, I'm not sure about this. We just drafted Kevin Johnson," and then he totally picked up his game. So I was really excited to see that. Obviously, though, starting to get up there in age as well. So I think that that's definitely something they need to continue to explore. The tight end position. Now, I was at training camp last summer with the Houston Texans, and they had some fantastic undrafted free agents that they eventually had to let go. They, however, only have 2 tight ends right now. They have Ryan Griffin and C.J. Fedorowicz, which means that they're going to need to explore somebody else. They let Garrett Graham go to Gary Kubiak in Denver, and I'm actually very all right with that decision. He was talented when he was healthy, but that was just not often enough. So that was, and I think that I like what they're doing with the tight end position right now as far as size. Ryan Griffin's a 6'6", C.J. Fedorowicz 6'7". Garrett Graham and Owen Daniels were like the smaller, more pass-catching type, and I think that's not necessarily as necessary anymore. As I was sort of saying, they've got the athletic wide receivers. They don't necessarily need the pass-catching tight ends as much. So I'm all right with them kind of going with the stockier guys, but they will need to explore that as well. And like I said, I think they have guys on their practice squad right now who actually could very easily step up. So that would be another area that I think that they should really start to explore. Let me see, what else? Offensive line, Dwayne Brown, left tackle, has been a fantastic starter. We saw what happened when he got injured this past season, and he's been a fairly consistent starter, hasn't really succumbed to injury, but that does kind of shake you up, so they should probably start to sort of investigate that. I don't know if you're going to find your starting left tackle, your next starting left tackle in like the undrafted free agent crop or the remaining free agent crop. That's sort of something that you like mine a little bit better, but at least a backup. And then next, I would say, obviously, your defensive end position, you have J.J. Watt, that. But you had a starter in Jared Crick, who I thought was a great compliment to him, who is now also in Denver. And so that's definitely something that they will need to investigate, who is going to fill in that position. So I would say those are what I'm thinking about if I'm the Texans. You know who your quarterback is. Amazingly, that's something they haven't been able to say for a while.
Speaking of quarterback, how much
baby steps? Baby steps.
Speaking of quarterbacks, how much of an upgrade is Osweiler over Brian Hoyer? Because I remember watching that Texans Chiefs playoff game last year, and it's 13-0 at halftime. I think Hoyer had 4 turnovers in the first half alone, but the Texans were the defense was still holding stout. Yeah. And then, of course, I think what ended up being 30-0 was the final. But yeah, how much of an upgrade is Brock?
I was at that game, so I could tell you it was very disheartening. But I can tell you the first thing that I think Osweiler brings is consistency. For better or for worse, he is your starter. There's not going to be a carousel. Players aren't going to have to start to become more or less accustomed to a guy. They're sticking with him. Unless there is a complete train wreck, I wouldn't see anything happening, shifting until, even the buy. And I don't see it happening. I think that they have paid him the kind of money that they're saying, for better or for worse, this is us. So I think consistency is the first thing you get. Second, I think you get that big play comeback quality, explosiveness that I was referring to earlier. You get a guy who has a huge arm, who can stand in the pocket, who's going to deliver it. How many times? I watched a lot of the games that he was in, because they were so frequently on national TV. And he just stood there, and his size makes it so much easier for him to see over the top of the line and just really deliver these passes. Riskier is not necessarily the word I'm looking for, but less afraid to sort of throw down the field. And I think at this point, his mentality is more of that than Brian Hoyer, who sort of played a little bit more guardedly. Honestly, Brian Hoyer's playing style at the better part of the season, before there was this sort of decline that was in the playoffs, was similar to Matt Schaub's in a good time, where he was consistent enough in sort of short yardage situations, but when things got sort of ugly, as far as having to be asked to throw on 3rd and 10 or 3rd and 13 with a blitz coming, he sort of crumbled.
Yeah.
And he asked for players to do things for him to bail him out. And I think that Osweiler will provide this more aggressive mentality of, no, like, let's do it. Like standing in there and being like very, just having more of a presence, I think is what it is. And I think that Brian Hoyer was done a severe disservice by sort of always having to look over his shoulder, being like, am I going to be replaced, until about midway through the season when they were finally made the decision, nope, you're it. But still, there was the injury, and then coming back, and then trying to come in and out. It was a mess. Yeah. I think everybody can agree. So hopefully that will bring, Brock will bring more stability and an attitude shift. He did not win the Super Bowl, but he was in a championship, and his team won the Super Bowl. And when you're entering a team like the Houston Texans that are just so desperate for a better playoff run, what you get is a team that wants to lean on a guy like that, who says, you were just at the promised land. Talk to us about it. What was it like? What do we need to do? What were guys around you like? A lot of the Texans obviously are familiar with Peyton Manning because of his time as the Colts.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're a Houston Texan, you want to talk to Brock and say, what did you learn from Peyton as a leader, as, keeping composure and that sort of thing? And I think that mentality is also really, really important to bring to the team.
But could that be too much for Brock? Because obviously this is going to be if everything is already going to be put on him anyway, and then everybody's trying to bombard him with all these different questions, and could the pressure that comes with that, with being told, hey, you have to carry this team because we don't have anybody else. It was a completely different situation for him in Denver. He had less pressure on him, really, when it came down to it, just because he was under Peyton's wing. Could that actually set him up for failure as well? Or does he have the mental fortitude to be able to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to be a leader?
Well, I certainly hope he will as a fan, but that's a really legitimate concern. As you say, it sort of reminds me of the time when Colin Kaepernick sort of took over for Alex Smith, was playing lights out because he was sort of competing to have the stage, didn't know for sure if he was going to really retain his spot, so there was less pressure in that way. I think that's a really legitimate concern. As I said, this is a completely different situation. Obviously, different coaching staff, different team, everything. I do think that as far as the teams themselves, he's not being put in an altogether different situation, which is helpful. He's still being placed on a team where he will not be asked to win games solely by himself. The defense of Houston Texans won more than its handful of games on its own.
Yeah.
So he will not be asked to come in and win with his arm. And he has been given a large arsenal of weapons now. Most notably, a Pro Bowl wide receiver in DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah.
So that won't be such a different circumstance for him. And we still have yet to see how Lamar Miller will work out in the in the scheme of things. But similarly, he's being sort of lent that as well. So there is, of course, going to be a shift, a learning curve. And as you said, there will undoubtedly be pressure on him. I can't wait to see the atmosphere at training camp. Is probably going to be crazy this summer as opposed to last year, where it was a little bit more tepid. But I think that he is being given a lot of support. He's not being thrown into a situation where he's saying, you must win by yourself. I think he's been given, like I said, a great defense, great support on offense. And I think Bill O'Brien has done a lot with very little over the past few seasons. And so that sort of gives me hope that he'll be able to forge a relationship with him and coach him up. And I think I know this sounds a little bit silly, but I think he will be given at least a tiny bit of competition. Brock Osweiler is a starter. I mean, he's being paid
right
a very, very large sum of money.
Yeah.
But I don't think that he will be, sort of regarded as the only talented arm on the team. I know they value Tom Savage very highly.
I like him.
And Tom Savage, to me, I think was this close to winning the job last season, hurt his collarbone. And I think if he hadn't, he would have certainly been given opportunity to play at one point last season, given the amount of guys that came in. So Brock Osweiler is your guy, but if he's worried about feeling like it's all on him, I think there will still be at least some respect paid to other guys, and there will be support for him. So that was a very long answer.
So obviously we've been talking in depth about Houston themselves, but let's talk a little bit more about you. You actually work for Bleacher Report, and give us a little background on that. How'd you get into sports in general, and then how did you turn that into a job with Bleacher Report and covering sports like you do now?
So sports started as a very minor part of my life, to be honest. I would like to be able to say that I started out, day one, very, very enthusiastic fan. My first real exposure to sports was, as I said, I'm from Canada. My dad is a huge Montreal Canadiens fan, which is kind of problematic being here in Boston. So that was my first real taste of sports. Moved to Houston actually the year that the Houston Texans began their first season as the expansion franchise. So my dad sort of became a fan of theirs. And I was, pretty tepid about it, to be honest. Football, I played some basketball when I was younger, but my first real love for sports myself was actually, I was an equestrian. So that sounds a little bit strange, but
sounds
that was actually my first love. Exactly, right? That's actually a huge thing in Canada. It wasn't until I was in middle school that I became a super huge football fan. And as the Texans sort of became this more consistent team, first with a 500 season, and then their 10-6 season, which unfortunately ended with Matt Schaub hurting his foot, there sort of was this absurd amount of interest on my part. I've since been to every Texans home playoff game, and I go every time that I'm home as often as I can. I attend training camp now as a media member, which is much better. But my interest in sports really started to take off at that point. And then pretty much every other sport started to follow because once one begins to, sort of explore these sites like ESPN, Bleacher Report, etc., you start to become engrossed in all the other storylines. And I just fell in love with it at that point. As far as Bleacher Report, my journey with Bleacher Report did not actually start until my journey with Pro Football Spot began, which is when I started really starting to get reps with writing, becoming a better writer. I go to school to become, in the College of Communications, so in journalism and advertising, but it's not real per se. You're putting in hypothetical situations. You're going to town meetings. You're covering your college football team or your college hockey team. So it's not quite the same intensity. You're not talking to Bill O'Brien, which is considerably more intimidating. So Pro Football Spot allowed me the opportunity to get reps, really use analysis, get feedback from people who challenged some of my opinions, challenged my analytics, challenged the emphasis that I put on certain things and not on others. And that sort of refined where I was going until about a year ago. I decided to submit myself to a 3-month-long rigorous sort of boot camp through Bleacher Report. And so I got accepted, and I essentially, over the course of 3 months, did every single job, reporting job for Bleacher Report to some extent. So all the analysis for every sport, breaking news, trending topics, essentially everything. And at the end of it, they offered me a job. So I took it.
That's really cool.
And so now that's what I do. So now I work with the front page breaking news trending topics team, which is very exciting, but also very high pressure, as you can imagine. On days like I can remember, I worked the night of the Warriors' historic 73-win game and Kobe Bryant's final game. And on nights like that, you feel like you don't have any time at all, but it's also very thrilling. So it's the sort of thing that is very high pressure, as I said, but also extremely rewarding. And you don't see the time go by. It's very exciting.
Hey, Vanessa, I just have one final question for you. I just want to kind of give you just a quick synopsis on the outlook for the Houston Texans 2016 season, because last year was kind of a down year for the Colts. Entering this year, they're definitely at full strength. Jacksonville's trending in the right direction up. It seems like everything they've been doing with the draft season has just been an A+, if you're great. And then Marcus Mariota now has a year under his belt. So Texans won the division last year, playoff team. What do you think about this year, 2016?
This season is extremely difficult to gauge in the sense that last season, I remember the schedule came out and I said to myself, these guys are going to the playoffs, no quarterback or not. Their schedule just lent themselves to that. As you said, the Colts were wounded. They backed into the situation. Would I love for them to have a Carolina Panthers type of turnaround where the Carolina Panthers backed into the season before last and then ended up going to the Super Bowl the following year? I mean, that would be fantastic. I just don't think it's going to happen because, as you said, the AFC South used to be the cellar of the NFL. It's very soon going to be the ceiling.
Yeah.
There's so much young talent. As you said, all these teams that people sort of used to mock and be like, we get, I used to look at, the schedule and always say, okay, so 4 wins, for the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Tennessee Titans, and what else? So that's just not the case anymore. On paper, I think that the 2 best teams in the AFC South are the Jaguars and the Texans. I know it's sort of scandalous to say because the best quarterback in the division, I still believe, is Andrew Luck.
Yeah.
It's still Andrew Luck. He just doesn't have the best supporting cast. And I don't know that Chuck Pagano. Wow, Andrew Luck. Chuck Pagano is still the best fit. I think they might need to shake that up a little bit. And they're still, the oldest team in the NFL. It's not trending in the right direction. So I think right now, on paper, which almost means nothing on Sundays, the Texans and the Jaguars are the best team. As I said, what is that going to translate to at noon or 1 o'clock, depending on where you are on a Sunday? It could really mean anything. If you're asking me, I think that it is going to come between those 2 teams. but I don't think that either of them will be competing for a bye in the playoffs. I think that, whoever wins the division is going to be probably the fourth seed, just because of them having to play each other for 6 games out of the year. But I definitely think that the AFC South this season could not only send a division winner, but also a wild card team. So I think that I wouldn't be surprised at all to see 2 teams come out of the AFC South in the playoffs for this season. So that wasn't particularly your answer as far as who I think will win. It's so challenging to say at this point because the Texans have assembled so many pieces that have yet to work together. So by virtue of that, I perhaps see them more as a wild card team. But a wild card team that, given some momentum into the end of the season, could possibly unseat some of the higher seeds. Who's to say? I think the AFC South, or the AFC in general, has lost a little bit of its ferocity with the downslope of the Denver Broncos. Downslope. We don't know where we're getting in Paxton Lynch or Mark Sanchez. What we do know with Mark Sanchez, and the Patriots, the Patriots are the Patriots, so we know what we're going to expect out of them. As far as the other teams, Cincinnati Bengals, nothing to sneeze at, but can't really seem to get it together in the postseason. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, if healthy, are as good a team as any, so that'll be really interesting as well. But I think the AFC South as a complete division is really starting to take off. And I don't want to say they're going to become the next NFC West of a few years ago, but it's very possible that in a few years, that's exactly what we'll be looking at. So just put it out there, bold picks. In a few years, when this ends up being real, I'll come back.
Go ahead, Alex.
Last question from me. So you detailed your ascendancy through the ranks of Bleacher Report in your sports media career. What has been the most exciting? I guess I'll use most exciting. What's been the most exciting incident or moment or just experience for you as somebody actually covering this sport?
That's a tough one. I have to say, the moment that gave me the most excitement was my very first day as a Houston Texans sort of media, credentialed media member at training camp this past summer. My first day, I spent all of August going, but the very first day was extremely exciting. It was an evening. And there were all sorts of other famous players out there. There was Willie McGinnis was out there, and he was talking to J.J. Watt, and it was extremely rowdy. There were so many reporters, and the fans were going crazy. And I distinctly remember a few things. I distinctly remember just walking up to DeAndre Hopkins, as opposed to a season before, having been on the other side of it, getting up super early to go to the training camp and trying super hard to get these guys' attention, walking up to him and being like, "Hey man, how you doing?" Talking to him for a few minutes. At one point, this sounds terrible to admit. At one point, I collect draft hats and I have them all signed. And I literally pull my draft hat out of my backpack and I say, "I know I'm here as a media member, but," and he doesn't even let me finish. He just starts laughing and he just signs it. And he's like, "You know what? It's cool. It's cool." And so, I bid him farewell, and he was a very cool guy after I talked to him for a few minutes. And then I have to say, actually, a very close second was this past spring break when I returned to Houston. I actually got the opportunity to sit down and talk to Arian Foster for over an hour at his brother's gym.
We're related.
Sorry?
My last name's Foster, so he and I are. I tell people that we're related. So. Yeah,
I see the resemblance.
I was actually a huge Arian Foster fan early on. I still am rooting for him. And so I actually connected with him over Twitter, and he was super generous with his time. And I was like, look, I would love to have an opportunity to talk to you before you get out of town. And he completely agreed. Like I said, we met at his brother's gym, and that'll be a piece that I'm going to be really assembling over the summer so that I can get it out there when he does sign with another team.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic experience because he was such a player that I looked up to early on in my interests, like really, really like dynamic interest in sports when I really thought that this was something that I was going to do. He was one of the guys who I really paid attention to on the team. So it was sort of full circle. It was kind of sad that I was meeting him under the pretext that he was no longer going to be with the team. But that was definitely a pivotal moment when I got to say, you know, I did a feature interview with an athlete like that, one-on-one.
That's awesome.
That was really, really great moment for me. So I got to say those two were sort of the mama, I made it early moments.
That, Alex, she forgot to mention, between Arian Foster, DeAndre Hopkins, and being on the AM Sports show, those are
of course.
Those are 3 highlights.
Of course.
Hey, Vanessa, I gotta say, I'm just really impressed with you. Just keep doing what you're doing. It's
I appreciate it.
Yeah, may I ask how old you are? Is that okay to ask? I know we're not supposed to ask.
Oh yes, I will be 21 this Saturday.
So the fact that you're happy early birthday, but the fact that you're 20 years old and just
happy birthday.
The fact that you're just killing it. So just keep doing what you're doing, and just congrats on all your success and future success, because I think you have a bright career. And when you make it big time, you remember Alex and I. Alex and Martin, we're the 2 Americans, so.
Always. Tellement, je veux complètement te rappeler.
There you go.
Je veux toujours te rappeler.
So, you definitely know your stuff.
Always.
If you certainly know your stuff, and if people want to just follow you or just read some of your articles, where can people find you?
So there is my Twitter, which is at Vanessa de Beaumont, so it's VANESSADEBEAU. And if you would like, you can, I know that I have a Bleacher Report page. Well, actually, all of that sort of information can be found on my website, which is VanessaDeBeaumont.com. And there's a link to my Pro Football Spot pieces and my Bleacher Report stuff. And so, yeah, that's probably an easier way to find it all. VanessaDeBeaumont.com. So there's always a link in my Twitter as well if you just want to go on the Twitter. But that's where you can find me. That's where it's basically all me. It needs a little bit of a rehaul, but it's in pretty decent shape.
No, it's a good site. I checked it out the other day. And people can also find you hanging out in Arian Foster's brother's gym. So.
Oh, well, yes, of course. So, yeah, it's been really great talking to you guys. I'd love to, come back maybe after training camp.
Yeah.
Tell you guys what I'm.
Love to have you.
Absolutely, definitely. All right, everyone, that's all the time we have today. Thanks so much for Vanessa de Beaumont joining us. If you want more, you can check us out on Facebook, AM Sports with Alex Martin. Please like the page. You can also check out our website, aimsportsguys.com. Follow us on Twitter. Our handle is at aimsportsguys. And if you want to watch the replay of this video and just leave comments, just go to YouTube and just search for AM Sports with Alex and Martin. You'll find a channel that I created and some of the other videos that we did. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Take care.